Gamers, welcome back. I'm Robo, and the dust has finally settled in the new Shining Revelry meta. After this video, you're going to know exactly which decks you should be using on your road to Master Ball rank, and maybe which decks you should be staying away from. Personally, on our journey to Master Ball rank, we have now encountered all of these decks. We have a lot of experience with them, and we've even gone on some notable win streaks, such as a 16 win streak all the way up in Ultra Ball 3. So we have a very good grasp on this meta. There's a lot to unpack. Let's get into it. And by the way, if you want to continue the conversation, come join the Discord. There's a lot going on over there. Let's get into it. Okay, we're starting off this tier list with a banger. We have the winner of the Ursa tournament back on March 29th. This deck features the brand new Giratina EX as well as our old faithful Mewtwo from back in Genetic Apex. And guys, this Giratina EX has completely taken the meta by storm. It is far and away one of the best cards to come out of the new set, Shining Revelry. If you're unfamiliar with this card, basically what sets it apart is Broken Space Bellow. This Giratina can set itself up. Having that ability to ramp is fantastic, especially whenever you pair it in the context of a deck that is running Psychic Energy. There are some other variations to use Giratina that are using Dark Energy, which we're going to get into that later. It's unavoidable to get into that. But quite frankly, this is definitely one of the best ways to run Giratina. On turn 1, you can Broken Space Bellow, add a Psychic Energy, as well as your turn's energy. Then on the next turn, you can do the same thing. That brings you up to 4 Psychic Energy, meaning that on your third turn, using Giratina, you are able to fire off big 130 damage attacks, 150 with red, and ladies and gentlemen, 150 damage in this meta is fantastic. You're picking up big KOs for 2 points, eliminating big EXs, crippling your opponents, and man, this deck is far and away, it's just incredible. Mars late game as well, especially in the Ultra Ball and Master Ball rank. You let your opponent go up 2 points, you Mars, and you'll just late game sweep because they have no draw. Poke Center Lady has also been a fantastic trainer to come out of this new meta. You also have potions as well to try to negate some of that Darkrai chip damage or Hitmonlee chip damage. Then, of course, you can cape your Giratina or you can cape your Mewtwo. That way, late game, you can come in and ensure that you survive a really big hit in exchange for firing off a big hit with your own attack plus red. I mean, you guys, this deck is very dangerous. I think it fits very firmly in the S tier, which is not going to be a surprise to anyone. This deck has been very interesting to see come into the meta because initially at the beginning of the meta, we saw a lot of Draagon paired with Giratina or Mewtwo Darkrai. And then all of a sudden towards this latter half of the meta, we are now seeing Draagon be removed and have great success as well. This deck has completely plagued ranked mode. It has a very strong presence in tournaments and it's just incredible. So let's keep it moving. Next up, we've got a fan favorite and a returning fan favorite as well. We have the old Charizard EX paired with a couple of new cards from the new Shining Revelry set. I would say this deck has been greatly improved. And as you guys know on my previous tier lists, I've always been pretty big on Charizard. Charizard did have a little bit of a lull there in the previous metas, but it's back. And I would say it's back for 2 main reasons. The first reason, there is a new Charmander and a new Charmeleon, which now allows Charizard to be able to attack if it is forced into the active slot early. So previously, if you had Charmander and you were forced into the active slot, you wouldn't be able to attack because you would burn energy. Well, this new Charmander doesn't burn energy, which is fantastic. The second reason I would say that this deck has been greatly improved is due to Iono. So Charizard, at the end of the day, it's a stage 2. Iono provides you that search capability to be able to thin out your deck and find those evolutions much faster. What you're left with after you make these 2 dramatic improvements is a fantastic deck in the S tier. Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we got another S tier deck, man. We're starting off hot right now. This is just yet again one of those decks that has been proven and tested. We have seen other Pokemon Pocket creators carry this deck all the way up into the Master Ball tier, even going as high as rank number 1. I believe it was Yamamoo, I apologize if I'm butchering that name, achieved rank 1 with this deck. My friend Mewy, who makes Pokemon Pocket content, also achieved Master Ball rank with this deck. I'm still not sure how I feel about Shaman in this deck. I feel like I almost would prefer the X Speed Shaman over the Healing Shaman. However, the chances of you opening with Shaman in the active slot are actually very quite low, so you don't really have to deal with that too often. Ultimately, the S tier is very fair. Let's keep it moving. Let's switch gears and talk about a deck that we were seeing a lot more at the start of the meta and not so much at this current point in the meta, as people have now started to identify some better Meowscarada decks, and we are talking about Meowscarada Executor EX. Ladies and gentlemen, Meowscarada is one of the best cards to come out of this new set. It is fantastic. The EX Pokemon are plaguing the meta, and obviously Meowscarada does enhanced damage all the way up to 130. If you're hitting an EX Pokemon, you pair that with red, you are basically one-hit KOing anything that is not caped. It's just fantastic. I think that the reason why it's not doing as well and we're not seeing as much of it anymore is because there are some better partners to pair with Meowscarada, and we're going to get into that later. So for that reason, and also Exeggutor EX can flop right at the end of the day. Exeggutor EX can flip tails and have a little bit of a lower damage ceiling. For that reason, let's not get into this too much. This is a B tier deck. It's decent. We're not seeing too much of it. Let's keep it moving. It's crazy, but Arceus and Dialga is still lingering in the meta. How interesting is that, right? I would say Arceus is honestly still pretty good, especially now that you've added in red into the meta. Now, instead of Arceus firing off big 130 damage attacks, Arceus can potentially be firing off big 150 damage attacks. Obviously, with this deck, you really want to get Dialga in the active slot and begin ramping your back line and then bring Arceus in for a late game sweep. But man, it's still a pretty strong deck. We've talked about this deck a lot in the past. I don't think there's too many more notes that need to be added. We're very familiar with it. There also haven't been too many new cards added that improve upon it beyond, you know, red or Iono, of course. I think that this deck is B+ to A-. That's where it lands. I think that my biggest quarrel with this deck and why it can't possibly be S tier is because it feels so horrible going first when you're using Dialga, when your opponent has that energy advantage against you, and then you still have to have those 2 turns to even begin ramping your back line. Oh my goodness, it feels so horrible. It's still very good though, and obviously whenever you do get Arceus up and running, it's a strong deck, man. There's no denying it, but it fits very firmly A-, B+. I'm very excited to talk about this next deck. We have the brand new Charizard EX that also has the shiny variation, which I pulled, by the way. And by the way, if you're interested, we have pack opening videos. I did finally manage to pull this baby. I'm going to be the first to admit that I was wrong about this deck. Whenever we first saw the Shining Revelry spoilers, I predicted this card to be S tier. I thought it was absolutely bananas that we were going to have a Charizard that could essentially ramp itself, right? You just take a turn to ramp yourself. You put that turn's energy on Charizard, and then on the next turn, you're able to fire off big 150 damage attacks. And man, it just did not perform in the meta. I was so disappointed by it. I was so excited to use it, and it's just totally flopped. One thing that I didn't anticipate was that everything in this meta was going to be caped and have over 150 HP. Also, if you want to try to ramp Charizard, you're going to have to stoke, which means you're going to have to take damage. And all of these big, heavy hitters in the meta are 2-shotting Charizard. So you're essentially sacrificing just one big attack that might get the KO for essentially Charizard getting knocked out. Of course, you can still ramp with Moltres, and maybe that makes it feel a little bit better. But if you're going to take the time to ramp with Moltres, why not just use a Charizard that's going to guarantee a KO? This is why we're seeing so much more play out of the older version of Charizard EX. Give me the guaranteed KO, especially in a meta like this. And ladies and gentlemen, for that reason, I would even make an argument for C+ for this deck. It is just inferior to our current Charizard EX. It honestly makes me feel a little bit bad to do that, so maybe we could make an argument for B-. Let's leave it in the B- at the very bottom of B tier, just because why would you do this if you have a more improved version of Charizard? But yeah, it's disappointing to say the least. I am very familiar with this next deck. We actually use this deck to carry us through basically all of the early tiers in Ranked. And I have claimed on stream many times that this was a top 2 deck in the entire game. However, that was early meta. The meta has definitely changed, and this is no longer a top 2 deck in the game. A lot of people these days are just completely removing Draagon entirely. I think people realize that Draagon, at the end of the day, considering the current meta, right, almost all the top tier decks are going to be able to one-hit KO Draagon. So people are saying, hey, I would rather just, remove Draagon because, best case scenario, you're just dealing 20 damage of rough skin, or maybe 40 damage if you're wearing a helmet. But I think people have realized, hey, just let me put Darkrai EX in the active slot altogether and not even have to worry about having a leaf to get Draagon out, or just let me have Giratina in the active slot and I'll take whatever damage comes with it, and I'll supplement with potions and Poke Center Lady, and then I'll just be ready to fire off big damage attacks. Don't get me wrong, though. This is still a fantastic deck. We're still seeing it in tournaments. We're still seeing it in ranked play. It's just no longer S tier. This now is an A tier deck. The rise and fall of Draagon in this meta was actually insane. It happened so quickly. Over the course of like a week, Draagon was just in. We were seeing it everywhere. And then now at the very top tiers of the game, you just never see it. I haven't seen it once over the past couple of days even. So, and also it's fantastic to see Darkrai as well. I think Darkrai plus Giratina is incredible because you just take those 3 turns to bellow with Giratina, and the whole time you're doing chip damage with Darkrai. So imagine a scenario where you have red, you have Giratina fully set up, and you have Darkrai on the bench. You Darkrai, you get 20 chip damage, and then you red with Giratina, that's 150 damage plus 20 for 170. You are basically one-hit KOing everything in the game, and we're going to get into a variant of this deck later on. But for now, this is still a very strong deck. It's just not S tier. Next up, we've got the old Space-Time Smackdown deck that has now been improved with red, and we are talking about Darkrai EX and Weavile EX. Now, I will say that this deck actually did have a pretty sharp flare-up recently in the meta, as we started to see a lot more of that Giratina Mewtwo combo, so some people were trying to use this to kind of counter that. Obviously, you need a couple turns to get that deck going, whereas Weavile EX can pressure you very early on. However, we're starting to see that taper off a little bit now, and I've also been seeing a variant of this deck using Weezing that I would say is pretty good. However, this deck for me falls either B+ or A-. I feel like the synergy between Darkrai and Weavile EX is always going to make this a strong deck, and you can always find yourself getting wins. However, if you're not playing against those matchups that are extremely favorable for you, Weavile EX really at the end of the day doesn't really have the biggest damage output. And remember, we're comparing this to the top meta decks. Look at the damage output in the S tier here. You know what I mean? Weavile EX simply cannot compete with that damage. So let's keep it moving. We're very familiar with this deck. It's an older deck. It's nice to see it again pop up here and there, but it definitely does not have nearly as much play as some of these other decks. All right, next up is a deck. I am shocked at how much we are seeing this in the meta right now. This is everywhere, and I'm talking about Gyarados EX with Manaphy and Origin Form Palkia. In the upper tiers of Ultra Ball as well as in Master Ball, this deck is just everywhere. You have about around a 50% chance of getting that Manaphy open, which is really what you're looking for in this deck. And then you just fuel your back line, Gyarados EX and Origin Form Palkia before you bring in the Gyarados EX, get some chip damage with Origin Form Palkia, try to get some picks, and then bring in Gyarados for a late game sweep, 140 damage plus 160 with red. And by the way, that's getting rid of a lot of things. There's so much Darkrai in the meta right now. Even if you cape Darkrai, you are not going to be able to run away from Gyarados plus red. So it's very powerful. The only thing is that this deck can feel a little bit clunky if you don't get the Manaphy start. If you don't get the Magikarp evolution, it can feel a little bit clunky. If you have people that can snipe the Magikarp, it doesn't feel the best. Obviously, Origin Form Palkia, you got to flip heads. It's, you know, there's some luck factor. However, with Misty, anything is possible. Believe in the Misty. With how much luck you would expect to need, for whatever reason, this deck still feels very consistent. And me personally, I probably have maybe a 50% win rate, 50 to 60% win rate against this up in the higher tiers. It just performs really good. I think red helps it out a lot. Gyarados can really serve as a late game sweep. Gyarados also has such a large amount of HP that it just makes it a good option for late game after all these people are fully set up with Giratina and Mewtwo. You know, Gyarados is going to be able to live those big attacks. Also, Irida, you know, water is just still so strong in the meta considering all the support that we have as far as trainers go. So yeah, guys, this is S tier. It really is just Gyarados that carries this thing, man. I mean, the fact that Gyarados plus red can KO basically everything, and then its HP enables it to be able to live those 2 hits, so you can bring Gyarados in first, get attacker's advantage, and then fire off another really big 140 attack. It's just solid, man. It's a really good deck. It has some pretty decent matchups, and we're just seeing it everywhere right now in tournament play and ranked play. I would say that our next deck is an example of how sometimes decks can get overlooked, and then as the meta begins to develop more, people try to find counters for the meta, and we can see other decks rise to the very top, and this is a great example of that. And we're talking about Meowscarada and Beedrill EX. Now, Meowscarada is fantastic. We've covered it a little bit in this video already, big 130 damage attacks whenever you're going up against EXs. That's 150 with red for really not a whole lot of energy. And then you pair it with Beedrill, which I would say right now, this is a top 2 way to pair Meowscarada. And Beedrill is also surprisingly tanky at what is, I believe, 170 HP. That's really good. And also Beedrill has the ability to, when it attacks you, it removes some of your energy. So these decks that, you know, like Giratina, for example, when they're using dark energy, you basically just stop Giratina in its tracks. It has to bellow, and you're always going to erase its progress. It's a very good deck. Also, we're seeing cards like Team Rocket Grunt. When you pair this with Beedrill EX's move, which already removes energy, and then you punish your opponent even more with Team Rocket Grunt, it can feel so demoralizing to go against. It's a very strong deck. And by the way, I recently posted a short covering a really funny moment with Team Rocket Grunt, showcasing how powerful this card actually is and how it can completely win you games. So be sure to check that out. But ladies and gentlemen, this deck has got to be in the bottom of S tier. I just think this deck has a lot of help, right? So think about your opening with Sprigatito. Sprigatito is an option to help thin out your deck. You can use the move Cry for Help and find other grass type Pokemon. Also, if you're building Beedrill and you get up to Kakuna, Kakuna can paralyze your opponent's Pokemon. It's very underrated, and it can actually win you games as well. So Kakuna, you know, on both sides of this deck, no matter what you're building, you have options. And I would say that the big thing right now is how EX heavy the meta is. If we weren't seeing these Giratina Mewtwo decks or these Giratina Darkrai decks, which are just plaguing the meta at such crazy levels, I don't think this deck would be performing nearly as good. I think it's really being carried by the current meta. With that being said, though, you cannot deny S tier. It has fantastic tournament presence. It's doing really well in ranked. I would say that my win rate against it is actually pretty bad because the decks that I've been using to carry me through, like Ultra Ball, you know, the higher ranks, they are very EX heavy. So yeah, it's fantastic. Alrighty, our next deck is one that if I were making this tier list even a week ago, I probably would have put it in the S tier. But you guys, the meta can change so quickly. This Gallade EX deck is no longer in the S tier. Let's try to work out where it belongs though. So first of all, before we even get into this deck, our last tier list video was so funny. As you guys know, in the previous meta in Triumphant Light, I was not big on Gallade. I was not a Gallade believer. I thought that this deck in previous metas was C+ to B-, and the comments, let's just say Big Gallade found my video and the comments let me know that Gallade does not belong in the bottom of B or wherever I put it. I still stand by that in the previous meta. I was not a big believer in Gallade. But ladies and gentlemen, Gallade has completely changed my mind, and I am here to say that I am a Gallade believer. And as I said, I would have had it in the S tier, but we've had some adjustments to the meta. And as of recently, we've seen a very sharp increase, and I mean sharp like crazy. We've seen a huge increase in the Giratina Mewtwo deck that features Psychic Energy. And I feel like, unfortunately, and this is one of the only ways I can explain this, but that's Gallade's weakness, right? And I feel like that's why we're seeing it less. It's like the only correlation that I can make because I was seeing Gallade everywhere and it was fantastic and it was doing so good. And obviously, you know, Hitmonlee does really good against those Gyarados decks as they're trying to build up Magikarp. And then, you know, Gallade EX really loves going up against those EXs that build up a lot of energy. Gallade just picks up a single one-hit KO. It's pretty good, to be honest with you. However, you know, these Psychic decks having Gallade's weakness plus red, and I think Gallade just has some problems in the current state of the meta. So looking at it under a microscope, it's A tier. I feel like we've got to show Gallade some respect though and put it at the top of A tier. And I even think that there's an argument there to be made for S-, but I think that currently with the exact state of the meta, A+ makes a lot of sense, but this deck is just fantastic, guys. I mean, it even features, we've even seen improvements to this deck with Iono, right? Because that's Gallade's glaring weakness is that it's a stage 2. If you don't pull Gallade, you're just cooked, because how are you going to manage with a Kirlia, a Hitmonlee, and a Marshadow? You're only going to be able to bring Marshadow in maybe one time for that 100 damage, considering its low HP and how much damage output is happening with some of these S-tier decks. So you need Gallade, and Iono really helps that problem. Also things like Pokemon Communication, although that's not necessarily a new card. Plus red, though, red can really secure you some of those points in those, you know, rare instances where Gallade is going up against a Pokemon that is just being there to tank a hit, and maybe they don't necessarily have energy put on them, which we see occasionally with, again, those Giratina decks that they want to build on the back line. Sometimes they want to be able to come in for a favorable matchup against Gallade, and if Hitmonlee's already been putting in some work, you never know. Gallade might be able to come in and clean up something that isn't necessarily fully set up either. So Gallade has some really great matchups. It's just fantastic in this meta. It's completely changed my opinion on Gallade as a whole, and I'm a big believer in it. It's just not S tier right now. Pikachu EX is making its return in Shining Revelry with a brand new card that features a 150 damage attack for exchange of all your energy, basically. This deck that you're seeing on screen right now is one of the best ways to play this. We have the new shiny Pachirisu, which of course you don't have to use the shiny variant. I do. But yeah, we now have a shiny Pachirisu that can ramp your Pikachu and help you get to that 3 energy requirement a little bit faster. Also, Dawn in this deck feels amazing because, as you guys know, with the Magnezone line in this, once you get up to Magneton, you start having something that can generate you free energy every single turn, so you can really surprise your opponents by, for example, turn 1, put energy on Pikachu. Turn 2, you put energy on Magnezone, Dawn it to Pikachu, and then you use your turn's actual energy to put it on Pikachu, and bam, 150 damage. It's obviously not going to be 170 on that turn because you get 1 supported trainer card per turn, so you have to choose between Dawn or Red, but 150 damage early on in the game is nothing to laugh at. I mean, that is unreal. And then you can try to make some plays with a late game Magnezone sweep, or you can bring Pikachu back, try to ramp it for later on. I would say it's really good. We did see a little bit of a sharp uptick in this deck once people started to figure out how to use it a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I think that the thing that holds this deck back is Pikachu's HP. Even if you're caping it at 140 HP, you have a lot of things running around in the meta right now. You got to think like, you know, Darkrai, once it has some chip damage on Pikachu, that's gonna make Pikachu really easy to KO. We're seeing a lot of Darkrai. Giratina plus even just a Giovanni, not even a red, but you know, or Giratina firing off its standard attack plus Darkrai chip, that's taking out Pikachu. And I think that's really why we've seen the decrease in Pikachu, is just because Darkrai and all the different options to chip Pikachu down has made it have a little bit of a tough time. For that reason, we're not seeing it in the upper tiers of Master Ball as much, and I feel comfortable placing this thing in the high B tier or the very bottom of A tier, and I think that's where we're going to leave it. All right, Rampardos is back, and this is yet another one of those decks that is highly improved by Red. If you think about Rampardos, 130 damage for a single energy cost, which is unreal, and you're only giving up 1 point if you get KO'd. You pair that with Lucario, that brings you up to 150 damage, plus Red is 160. Shout out to Turok Legend for subscribing on YouTube. I didn't realize I had alerts on. If you guys subscribe, maybe you'll be featured in a YouTube video. But yeah, with Red, this is just unreal. At 170 damage, you're basically KOing anything in the game, and you're only giving up 1 point. That's bananas. I've said it for weeks now. I would love to put this in the S tier, but we can't because of why? Fossil Search. Not having Fossil Search means this deck can never be in the S tier for consistency reasons. You have to be able to pull that Skull Fossil. So man, I feel like for that, it's so powerful though. The damage output is just insane. It obviously has all those tools that we're so used to seeing at this point. Hitmonlee, Marshadow, Lucario is fantastic as well. This is going to go at the very bottom of A tier. Actually, I've changed my mind. If this thing gets fully set up, you're just completely unstoppable. You're going to mow through everyone and give up a single point. We're moving this thing to like the middle to the top of A tier. Oh, dude, when we get Fossil Search, it's over. It's so over. Okay, next up, we have another deck that we were seeing a lot at the start of the meta, but it has really tapered off as we get towards the end half of this meta, and that is Meowscarada and Leafeon EX. Now, as a principle, this deck always kind of confused me because Meowscarada, you're going to need a couple turns to get that evolution anyways, so that's your opportunity to start building energy. You don't really need Meowscarada to serve as, you know, a way to ramp energy. And even then, it's not really doing a whole lot of damage either. I don't think that there's any reason to use this version of Meowscarada in the current meta, and for that reason, it's going to land itself in the C tier. There's really not much else we need to say about that. There's better Meowscarada decks. You should go use those. Next up, we have Wugtrio EX, and if this tier list was based off of fun, this baby would be in the S tier. I absolutely love Wugtrio EX. Unfortunately, it can't really compete with some of these other decks up here in the S tier or even the A tier. But ladies and gentlemen, this is basically just an improved version of Dragonite. Obviously, you're doing less than Dragonite. You're doing 150 damage, and that 150 damage is split into 3 different slots randomly. So you're getting 50 damage you're getting 50 damage 3 times essentially, right? But it's better than Dragonite because Dragonite is obviously a dual energy deck. So it requires that lightning and that water energy. Whereas with Wugtrio EX, you just need water. And whenever you pair it with cards like Misty, you can really have some crazy moments happen. You can see that this deck features Manaphy and Articuno. I think that there's some other interesting variations floating around with like Manaphy, Palkia, and things like that. At the end of the day, you need luck to go your way. I've even had some matchups with Wugtrio against Wugtrio EX where my opponent probably should have won, but the damage spread just didn't go their way. And I ended up being able to take those home. So for that reason, I think Wugtrio EX has got to be either in the C+ or the B- range. And due to how much luck is associated with it, I almost want to put this baby just in like the C+. Like, I don't really think that there's a viable way to use Wugtrio right now that can compete with the S and A tier decks. Maybe we actually go B- here for the variant that uses Palkia. And I just realized that, so I custom make these tier lists. I just realized that the Palkia here, I chose a Palkia image and didn't use a Palkia version of the deck. It is what it is though. But I think that the Palkia version is a little bit better. And we can probably justify B-, but just know it's really close to C+. This next deck feels surprisingly very good in the meta, and I'm talking about Skarmory and Magnezone, especially when you consider the fact that right now at the top of the food chain, we have those Giratina Darkrai decks or those Giratina Mewtwo decks that really take some time to get fully set up. You know, Giratina is going to need those, you know, full 2 turns of setup or full 3 turns of setup. And with Skarmory in your face with a tool on turn 1, it can feel very fast paced and you can really put some damage down on your opponent early game, to the point where now Magnezone can come in late game and do some pretty interesting sweeps. You know, obviously you're running Cyrus for that reason, Sabrina for that reason. Also, Iono has improved Magnezone a little bit to try to, you know, ensure that you can get that stage 2. However, you do want to build with Magneton, of course, but I think all things considered, it's a very good deck. Also, your opponent is going to have to KO 3 Pokemon at the end of the day to pick up the wins. So with Magnezone putting down that much damage, you can really make it happen. I have truthfully lost to this deck with meta decks. It's not S tier though, and I don't know for sure. Oh man, this is tough. I might even put this at the bottom of A tier right now. It's been such a recent rise to success. Earlier on in the meta, I would have had this lower, you know, in the B tier, bottom of B tier. I actually am comfortable putting this in the bottom of A tier though. It's been, like I said, a very recent swing, a very recent uptick in this deck, and I've been running into it quite a lot in the upper tier. So for now, bottom of A tier. Speaking of metal decks, we have yet again another deck that if this was based off of fun, if this tier list was a fun tier list, this baby would be in the S tier or the A tier. I love going around bonking my enemies. Tinkaton EX is also surprisingly very tanky at what is that 170 HP plus cape. That's actually pretty bananas. The only downside to Tinkaton EX is that for 3 energy, you can do what's called a terrific thumping and you can do 80 damage, but if you flip heads, it's 160. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can flip heads, you will decimate your opponents. The issue though is you have to flip heads. Knowing me, I'm going to flip tails. That's what really holds this deck back, aside from it being a stage 2 Pokemon. Now, obviously, you know, if you start getting into throwing in Cape, throwing in Potion, and throwing in Adaman, oh my goodness, removing Tinkaton from the field can feel like such a chore unless you have that weakness. But ladies and gentlemen, it being bound to 80 damage unless you can flip heads means it belongs in the B tier. We will move it up a slot just because that rainbow art is just absolutely insane. But yeah, no, I mean, this is a B tier deck. You all have got to give this Dialga Goldengo deck a try. The whole philosophy behind this deck is you try to lead with Dialga so that way you can ramp your backline, evolve the Gimmighoul into a Goldengo, and fire off big damage just as if you were a Celebi with Superior back a couple of metas ago, only now it is reborn into a Metal Energy Celebi. So yes, it's a ton of fun. There are a lot of downsides with this deck though, because if you want to commit to ramping up your Goldengo, this means Dialga is going to be taking a lot of hits, making it a vulnerable target for a late game Cyrus or just late game in general. And then whenever you finally do get Goldengo out onto the field, with Cape that's only 140 HP, you're firing off one really big hit, and then you're probably going to get KO'd by whatever is, you know, really popular up at the top of the meta. I think, you know, Giratina is going to be taking you out, a fully set up Mewtwo, Charizard, obviously. If you're caped and Gyarados you don't even need Giovanni with Gyarados, you're going to get KO'd. There's just a lot that doesn't really work for this deck right now. And for that reason, it is going to land itself in the C tier. Even if you pick up a single KO with Goldengo, you're going down the next turn. Dialga's invested everything to set up Goldengo. It's going to go down shortly thereafter. You could make some interesting plays here, right? Like there's Adaman, there's Poké Center Lady. You can try to stall some things out. However, you really need Goldengo to get fully set up. If that doesn't happen, your ceiling for Dialga's 100 damage. It's just not good enough in the current meta. This Berry deck beat my S tier meta deck yesterday, and it was so sneaky good. I was shocked at how well it performed. He was able to lead with Snorlax, and if you're unfamiliar with the Snorlax Berry synergy, essentially Snorlax is a very expensive card. It has a 4 energy cost to be able to get off that 100 damage attack, and it also has a really expensive retreat cost as well at a 4 energy retreat cost, but you can always take your opponent off guard by attaching 2 energy, and then you use Berry, and it cuts the energy cost in half to be able to launch that 100 damage attack. When I went against this deck yesterday, my opponent had the Snorlax lead. He got the 100 damage attack off, and then he was able to wake up. As I was trying to get Snorlax off the field, his deck ran a helmet, and so he was able to do some chip damage while he built up Meowscarada on the bench, and then he came in for a late game sweep with Meowscarada, and he beat me that way. So at the end of the day, what makes this deck good, I fear, is just Meowscarada, right? So having Snorlax is very funny. However, if you don't pull Berry, you are cooked. If you have Snorlax in the active slot, it's very expensive to get out. Snorlax also doesn't have this insane amount of HP to be able to stick around for a long time. So due to Meowscarada being really the only thing that's making it viable, aside from its just surprise factor and the fact that, you know, he has pretty decent heal potential with Erica and all that, I think that this deck, there's no way it could be S or A. This deck just falls in the B tier. Ladies and gentlemen, next up we have the Robo Special. And yes, folks, this is the deck that I used to achieve a 16 win streak in Ultra Ball 3. It was absolutely bananas. We have to actually move this all the way up the S tier. This is a direct contender with the Mewtwo Giratina variant. We are seeing it all over the place, and it is just so unbelievably strong. Earlier on in the meta, people were using a lot of Draagon in this deck. However, people realized very quickly that if you remove Draagon, the deck feels a lot better. Draagon at the end of the day only has 100 HP, and so your opponents are only going to be taking 20 damage when you consider the fact that a lot of these top tier decks are able to produce enough damage to one-hit KO it and then have something a lot stronger in the active slot. Shout out to Pokémads. Shout out to Pokémads for subscribing. Wait, I love Pokémads, dude. So that's another Pokemon Pocket content creator. Shout out to him for subscribing. That's what's up. Wait, go subscribe to Pokémads, dude. Okay, that's awesome. This deck can put out insane damage, and I will give you an example. Think about that deck that we were talking about earlier, Mewtwo and Giratina. If that Giratina has a cape on it, that's 170 HP. Well, we're actually able to remove that in a single turn by putting Dark Energy on Darkrai that activates 20 damage from Nightmare Aura. And then with a fully set up Giratina plus red, that's the other 150 damage that you need. And you're able to solo a fully set up full HP Giratina with cape, which is insane because we are seeing that so much in the meta. And it's really Darkrai's Nightmare Aura that's able to help, whether it's through early game chip damage or just through a late game play. After testing out all the different meta decks, where I've landed is that this is my favorite deck to use in the entire game right now because you're building up 2 threats at once and getting chip damage. And the chip damage is very important for so many different matchups. And you would be surprised how much that comes into effect. For example, Gyarados. We're seeing so much Gyarados in the meta right now. Well, those Gyarados decks have about a 50% chance to have Manaphy in the active slot on turn 1. What happens if they don't? And what happens if you go second and you get energy advantage? Well, that Magikarp that they have in the active slot is going to get chip damage on it. This is very, very good for a late game Cyrus play or something along those lines, right? If they don't pull any healing items, guess what? In 2 more turns, we're going to Cyrus it. We're going to take out that Magikarp. So there's just a lot of opportunity that this deck gives you whenever you consider the chip damage and building up 2 threats at the same time. It's just unreal. It is fantastic. Parting thoughts on this deck are that we are going to continue to see a lot of Psychic in the meta for the rest of this rank split. Giratina is not going anywhere, and obviously dark types have that typing advantage against Giratina. So plus red, you get some chip damage, man. It's fantastic. Okay, let's move on. All right, we are going from a Darkrai deck that I am an absolute fan of to a Darkrai deck that I'm a little bit of a hater of. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I am not the biggest believer in Darkrai Greninja in this current meta. And what's crazy is that if I go and I look right now at the tournament presence of this deck, it has a really strong tournament presence. It is so surprising. Like, I don't understand why people are using this deck. I think that there's better options out there. Speaking of these Darkrai decks, I actually just remembered that the deck that we just covered won the recent Ursa tournament. I think that was on April 5th. So that just goes to show that deck is insane. That's what you need to be using, not this Greninja deck. I think what I dislike so much about this Greninja deck is you're kind of bloating the deck for no reason. And I understand the philosophy behind all of the different chip damage potential, right? Like with Water Shuriken, with Greninja, if you're able to get that plus Darkrai chip damage, it is really strong. However, you're just bloating the deck and adding in all these extra cards when really what I want, what my heavy hitters are Giratina and Darkrai. So what's better, having the chip damage and then making a play for Cyrus, which you may or may not pull, or having guaranteed chip damage every single turn, knowing for a fact what Pokemon you're going to have and the consistency of those, 4EX, 3EX decks? I just think that the other variants are far and away better, and I've just got to put this thing in the B tier. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people watching this video are a fan of this deck based on the tournament presence. A lot of you have tried this deck. And maybe it was better at one point, maybe a week or 2 ago in the meta. Because to be fair, some of those tournaments that I was looking at, they aren't like the most recent. Boys, this is a B tier deck. I'm gonna move it up in the B tier a little bit though, to be fair to Giratina that's in the deck. However, yeah, it doesn't impress me, and I just think you should be using some of these other decks that are in the S or the A tier. Next up, we've got Clodsire EX, and this deck is very fun to play. If you're unfamiliar with Clodsire EX, for 2 energy, you can do Venoshock. It does 60 damage at base, but if your opponent is already poisoned, it does 60 extra damage. And this is where the synergy comes in with either you can run Wheezing. However, I think that the best way to play this is with Grafaiai, which has the potential to poison your opponents without having to do any moves, which is fantastic. This means you have Clodsire doing all the work, and then you have Grafaiai just poisoning things. With red, this is some pretty serious damage, right? Like 140 damage is nothing to scoff at. So yeah, no, this deck is interesting. Also, you can see that it features Darkrai EX. Darkrai is just a very safe bet for chip damage, especially once you already have Clodsire fully set up. That means, let's say Clodsire is fully set up, you get the poison, you get the chip damage, and you have red. Ladies and gentlemen, 160 damage, that is truly bananas. Not to mention how much Psychic we're seeing in the meta right now. So Dark is pretty decent. However, ladies and gentlemen, it's a B tier deck. Honestly, I actually think there might be an argument here for C tier whenever you consider like tournament presence, overall ranked presence. Like, I don't run into this at all. However, I'm going to be honest with you guys. This is one of my hot takes for the video. I would actually go as far as to say that this is an underrated deck, especially whenever you pair in Darkrai and you add in the potential for the poison damage plus the chip damage. I think that where this deck, no, I think I actually do have to go C tier here, because if you're not able to lean on Darkrai, which as you can see, this deck features 1 Darkrai, if you're not able to get the poison, I just think this deck feels really bad. If you get off on the wrong foot as well, Clodsire has a really expensive retreat cost of 3, and you just can't really compete with some of these other really strong EX cards right now in the meta. Darkrai, Mewtwo, Giratina, they all have 2 retreat cost. I think that the downside of this damage is going to prevent a lot of its consistency. For that reason, I'm comfortable with putting this in the C tier or low B tier. We could go either way. Next up, we've got the Immortal Beartic deck that features the S tier Wigglytuff art. But unfortunately, this tier list is not based off of art because you guys know where this deck would be. That Wigglytuff is going right here at the very top. But anyways, so this deck is very interesting. Beedrill knows Carefree Press. For 4 energy, it does 100 damage and it heals itself for 30 HP. You also have Wigglytuff, which has an ability that can heal the Beedrill. And then also, if you run Water Energy, you get heals from Irida. You can also run potions, and you see where I'm going with this. This Beedrill is just not going anywhere. I think what really holds it back, though, is it just requires so much energy to get set up. And you can't run Misty because Misty is only applicable on water-type cards, and Beedrill is a normal-type card. So you really are sacrificing 4 turns to get this thing going. And you guys, think about some of these S-tier decks up here 4 turns into the game. Giratina is fully set up, right? Like this is, it's not necessarily the best for that reason. It's also an expensive retreat cost. I really think what's holding this thing back is Beedrill's energy, right? Because Manaphy can set it up as well. Manaphy's really good for ramp. However, you know, you run the risk of not opening with Manaphy. Now it's going to feel very clunky. I just think that this deck belongs in the D tier. If we had some more consistent ramp options, if Beedrill required less energy, maybe this deck is just missing a few things, and then it could be something. But I think right now it just takes too long to get set up, and whenever you do get fully set up, you're not doing enough damage, and your opponents are going to be able to out damage your heals because, again, you need perfect case scenario to get that immortal level of heal. So yeah, I just think this is a D tier deck. Our last deck today is a special one that if you made it to the end of the video, you are seeing a dark horse pick from me. I have not run into this deck too much. I ran into it today and I ran into it last night, but it is picking up in Steam clearly. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't have the best win rate against it. It was so sneakily good, I couldn't believe that I'm not seeing it more in tournaments and things like that. Essentially, the goal here with this deck is to lead with Carnivine and to get Arceus on the bench as soon as possible. If you can do that, that 50 damage pressure is pretty crazy considering the current meta. If you think about it, cards like Giratina, they need multiple turns to be able to get set up. If you're able to start firing off those 50 damage attacks every single turn early, this is pretty bananas. Also, you have Rotom there in the back to be able to snipe and, you know, make Cyrus a little bit more effective for a late game play with Arceus. But the whole game plan behind this deck is to try and do some chip damage early, which in Carnivine's case, you could actually do some pretty serious damage and force your opponent into a really weird spot after, you know, going into your 3rd turn attacking with Carnivine. But yeah, you just want to do some chip damage and then bring Arceus in for a late game play to sweep. And it is surprisingly good. On paper, it really didn't impress me at first. The first time I was looking at this, I was like, I don't really see the vision here. And then I played against it. And I think that where this deck really picks up steam is just in the current meta. It's another one of those decks that at the start of the meta, nobody's using it and everyone's looking past it. And then at the end of the meta, once you see how much, like the sheer volume of these, you know, Darkrai Giratina decks, it's really good. And for that reason, ladies and gentlemen, this dark horse pick is making its way up to the A+ tier. Very good and very worthwhile to use and at least try out whenever you get up to these, you know, Ultra Ball, Master Ball. I mean, even Great Ball tier, you know, you're going to be running into some stuff where this deck is really good. Give it a try. Final thoughts, I think it turned out really good. You know, after looking at some of these other decks, I think you could make an argument to just go ahead and move this Leafeon Meowscarada into the B tier just because Meowscarada is going to carry this thing. When you look at the S tier and the A tier, there's just so much EX. You know, if you can get Meowscarada going, it's going to carry. I just want to take a moment, though, and reflect with you guys on the state of ranked, and I want to sympathize with you. I know a lot of people have been telling me, like in the Discord, for example, that it feels very hard, and this is why it feels hard. Look at the S tier and look at the A tier. We have got so many top tier decks that are diverse and they can win in so many different ways. And at the end of the day, boys, you need a little bit of luck to go your way. So better lucky than good. Don't forget that. But man, hey, just keep grinding. You guys will make it. If you're on the road to Master Ball rank, I wish you guys luck. If you're not trying to make it to Master Ball rank, you're just trying to have fun, see how far you can go, I wish you luck as well. Make sure to join the Discord. I would love to continue the conversation over there and hear what you guys think. If there's a deck that was missing, let me know in the comments. I'll try to read all the comments and reply as soon as I can. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one.